Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to have as my guest, Michelle Holling-Brooks. Michelle has over 20 years of experience working as an equine professional and coach in the field of equine-assisted activities and therapy, specializing in working with clients to heal trauma, post-traumatic stress, and attachment issues. After a life-threatening illness at the age of 13 changed Michelle's life, a horse named Schedule helped her heal her body, mind, and soul. Michelle is passionate about sharing the lessons horses have taught her about healing and personal growth with her clients and other professionals. She believes that horses provide us all with the gift of awareness, the kindness of unconditional love, and an open challenge to us as humans to step into our own empowered voice. And I know Michelle's work expands beyond the work of equine therapy and working with horses, and we're going to get into all of that. But before we do, Michelle, welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast. It's a pleasure having you on the program today.
Thank you, Dave, for having me, and I am ready to dive in and explore this wonderful world.
And before we explore the wonderful world of horses and everything else that you do with your coaching practice, we got to give a shout out to Chris Mamoni. Chris is another podcaster in the grief space. He has the Empowered Grief Journey podcast, and he introduced me to you, and we had a really great introductory call, and we find ourselves here recording a podcast. So I'm excited. I'm glad the stars aligned. I'm glad our energies aligned. And so that we could take a deep dive into what you do.
Grateful to him. And also, just as you were talking about that, we have another one, Russ, also is one that it connects. So we had two people that interwove together as well. So I was just thinking of that when you gave that shout out. I was like, oh, we got another one in there.
That's right. I forgot. Russ Tulip was another one who was instrumental in getting us together. Russ is a great guy. I was on his podcast. He's been on mine. Does a lot of great work with trauma-informed therapy for men, and he's got a great story himself. So,
two great people.
Yes. And that's one of the things. There's a lot of great individuals in the podcast community that we just look out for each other, and we try to introduce guests to each other that we think are going to make our platforms more meaningful. And it's really a cool, very collaborative effort to be a part of. So Michelle, my first question for you is tell our listeners about the experience or experiences that have shaped your life path and your life passions today.
I loved the name of your podcast when it was like Teaching Journeys. And I know that you're a professor and teacher and all that stuff. So it's a fun thing. But that word journey just really taught me, because I think that is the crux of us, right? That in the journey of our life, we have different experiences, and those experiences weave together this connective web, and it guides us in certain places. And my experiences through my life have definitely led me to the work that I do. I can't imagine kind of being able to get off that ride and go in any other place, because healing and the work of healing, both physical, emotional, mental, and eventually figured out that the spiritual piece was in there too, has just really been what my whole journey has been around, because illness has really shaped me in different time frames. And so when I was 13, as kind of you alluded to, is really when my life passed. Before that, I had always had kind of physical issues in my world. Like I had had 13 surgeries by the time I was, 8 years old, because I had really bad hearing issues and other stuff like that were putting in there. So medical issues and that being my main classroom for my journeys has been a part of my life from the very get-go. But at 13, it really took a crescendo, so to speak. It happened around horses, which is kind of ironic in a way because it's one of the main ways that also helped heal me, also were a catalyst for my biggest kind of wounded healer in a moment. And I got infected with equine eastern encephalitis from mosquitoes. And so that illness in my brain made my brain swell. And that in itself would have been a problem to have viral encephalitis and running that as a 13-year-old. But then it dominoed into viral spinal meningitis. So the lining of my brain stem swelling inward and then my brain itself swelling outward equaled a very unhappy brain. I ended up slipping into a coma for 7 days. And during that time frame, I always like to preface it and say my family gets to tell their story of what that was like for them and what this experience of having a daughter on the flip side of that coma. However, what I honor in this story is what that experience was like for me and what that led me into. And I also like to let people know that my story is a very visceral story. However, everyone has versions of this, is what I eventually found. Everybody has ways in which life kind of rips them away from their sense of self and that journey of finding our way back. So at 13, yeah, the encephalitis and the spinal meningitis kind of congealed together during that coma. My body just lost of balance on a lot of things. One was I ended up deaf from the amount of fluid that got stuck in, and that was happening. I was blind, but not like dark blindness. It was light blindness. So the visual cortex is right here at the back where all of that trauma and that swelling was happening. And so it blew out like an aperture. And light was so incredibly painful. And I couldn't hardly see because everything was blinding white to me. And it was just overexposed. And it was really not okay. Additionally, there was nerve damage that happened to my nervous system. And so I ended up about the middle of my back down, paralyzed without any use of the lower half of my body. So all of those things were problematic to be 13. And now I'm deaf, I'm blind, and I'm paralyzed from the middle of my back down. But the bigger thing that happened during that time frame was that I was totally wiped of the sense of self. So there was no Michelle, no memory of the Michelle, no idea of what a human was, who my family was, my friends, all of that completely gone. And so I was basically this deaf, blind thing that just sat there and was very reactive. All I knew was when I woke up was that I was in pain, that I couldn't communicate or to move. I didn't know to even think to communicate or to move. So everything was just reactive. Things were happening to me. I didn't understand that there was a me that was happening. And so it was just trauma upon trauma upon trauma upon trauma when this version woke up from that coma, post-coma.
You know, it's ironic at 13 when our identity is beginning to form in early adolescence as we're looking to kind of explore the world and determine who we are. You had no memory of who you were.
Not even an inkling of an impression that would ground me, like not a connection to a family, not a connection to a rhythm, not a connection to a place or a locality or a community. All of that was wiped out.
Can you go back? Can you recall how it felt being that untethered at 13?
I have gone back now, and even the words I'm putting to it now through my own journey of working with this. And it just felt completely unmired, I guess is the best word. Like I just felt pain. I just felt complete hypervigilance because the people, the nurses, the doctors, they were all trying to help me and I was just reactive. And because, yes, I woke up, but my head was still dealing with encephalitis. That's a headache that I can't even begin to describe what that was. And I had multiple spinal taps that were leaking. So that was happening, but I couldn't share that information. My body was still incredibly disorganized from losing all of its rhythms. And so it just felt like an assault was happening 24/7. Eventually, I started to figure out, I called them shadows because humans looked a little bit darker in that white blindness to me. And I started to figure out and track some of the shadows that I could predict. And those turned out to be the doctors and the nurses, and they were predictable. They would come in, they would move me, they would do different things. Sometimes it would hurt. That was when they were doing like medical things like IVs or other stuff like that, changing out bed things. Because again, I didn't know to ask to go to the bathroom. I didn't know to say I was hungry. I didn't, all the things you think of as automatic. Imagine not having a connection to that. That's where I was. I was in the hospital for a little over 3 months total once I woke up from that coma. In that time, the hospital became my organism. It became my body. I started to understand its rhythms and to work with it and to track it. However, there were 3 shadows that I really struggled with, and I felt like there was nothing I could do to make them happy. They felt very needy to me. They felt over the top to me, and it turns out that those 3 patterns were my mom, my dad, and my sister. And they emotionally, they wanted their daughter. They wanted their person to be okay. They wanted her to remember them. They wanted her to not be in pain. My sister probably just wanted to go back to being a freshman in high school where, her worst worries were like, what do I do as a brand new freshman, and not have the sister who is, sick and in the hospital and separating her out from her world. All of these things they wanted, and I didn't know who they were. I just knew that they wanted something. I couldn't give it to them. And that was so much pain and so much trauma. There was nothing in there that felt okay to me.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not only a disconnect, it was a disconnect from the inside out, from
Mhm.
your own, body and those individuals that were around you. And yeah, I think shadows is kind of an interesting way to put that, because whenever I know there's been anything traumatic that happens to the brain, whether it's a brain injury or like the infection that you had, one of the things is that individuals with brain trauma or injury, they see shadows coming out of the light, and that's how they can kind of form what's going on.
That was the beginning. So while I figured out the hospital and I started to find a sense of I could predict. And that's what our nervous system wants. It wants to be able to predict our environment and then know how to show up for it. Well, I knew how to show up for the nurses and the other stuff. I knew how to just let them move my body. I figured out to push a little button, when something felt uncomfortable, or and somebody would come and go through the checklist, like, is she wet? Is she hungry? Is she, like they would do the checklist, and I would get more comfortable. They would maybe give me some pain meds or something like that. And whatever discomfort I was having would get resolved. But the problem is, once I got medically to the point where I was pushing the button and I was, eating on cue, I didn't ever really want to eat on my own. I didn't have any desire to do any of that. I just would do whatever somebody told me to do, because I had tried fighting and it didn't work. I fell over, and they would restrain me and other stuff like that. So I learned really quickly to not fight. And so I went into functional freeze mode, and that's just the camp of where I ended up, was down in there. When they deemed me well enough to go home, they sent me home with the 3 energies that I felt the least safe with. They sent me into, like a place that I felt was absolutely unbearable. And I lost the place where I felt a sense of safety, a sense of predictability, a sense of, okay, I don't know what this thing, called Earth School is. I have no idea what's happening. I didn't even know I was in a body. I didn't even know to think of a sense of self at that point. But I had figured it out enough, but now that was totally gone. And so when they sent me home, I went into an environment that felt even more suffocating, more separation. My dad was active duty military at the time, and it was right when the first Desert Storm, it was 1990, was kicking off. So he was overseas, all the other places he'd been able to been more present for me. We lived right outside of DC. When I was in the hospital, once I came home, he started to have to do all the different things again. And so there was all of that happening. My mom's overwhelmed, my sisters, everybody trying to get me to remember this Michelle. And I just went further and further into the void, further and further separation from this body, further and further separation from even wanting to acknowledge anything in this quote physical world because I didn't have a connection to it. I didn't have a draw to it. And if anything, it felt that I could never do whatever it is they wanted, whether it was PT, OT, this, that, and the other. There was just no place for me to connect. And so I just didn't. And I just stayed this little. At the time when I went in, I grew 3 inches in the hospital. So I came out, I went in like a little over 5'9". I came out 6'1" as a 13-year-old. And I was just this huge snake that just let people move them around. And I just didn't engage. And that was my world until schedule. But that's where I was at.
Well, you've talked about your illness. You've talked about the challenges with that. So let's talk about recovery. What is specifically the role that schedule played, and equine therapy as well too have played in terms of getting you to where you are today?
This is where I will give my parents a little prop. Is they knew that the one thing I liked before all of this was horses. And so we didn't own horses. I rode at the local place, and I was like the little barn rat that they had to like pry out of the room. And so she was like, I don't know. And I think back and I'm like, 1990 was before like internet, and I'm like, she had to figure this out, which is kind of crazy to me. But she had done some research and heard about therapeutic riding. There wasn't a center at that time, just outside of DC where we grew up. But she went back to the barn and she talked to the owner and she talked to my instructor, and she was like, look, there is this thing there. It's growing. Are you willing to let her come out? And I was at a able-bodied eventing and hunter jumper rider barn. So that's big horses, big jumps, off the track thoroughbreds, warm, like these are not your therapy horses. These are from performance athletes. And they were like, I don't know, but somehow they worked them down and they were like, okay, fine. So it had been about 6 months since I had come home. At this point, I was still in a wheelchair. I wasn't fucking. I knew that there was a sound that came out of my mouth from the vibrations, but I was still deaf and I was still blind. So they were trying to teach me to sign inside of somebody else's hand, think Helen Keller. And so they're trying to get me to engage in anything and everything they could. And again, if you picked my hand up and moved it to the wheelchair, I would do it. If you put a spoon in my hand, I would know that you'd want me to feed myself and I could get you to go away if I just did what you want, but I was refusing to interact. So I wouldn't try to make eye contact. I wouldn't try to move towards a sound or a touch. I mean, this was my posture. And I was a little weeble wobble. So if you pushed on me, I just fell over. So I didn't reach for anything physically because I figured out if I reached physically, I fell. But my mom said, well, maybe horses will do something different for her. So they packed me up. They put me in the car and they took me out to the barn. And it was the first experience, Dave, that I had that I actually wanted to see, air quotes. I wanted to engage. I wanted to know my environment I was in, because the minute they opened that door, I smelled the barn. And you know this probably, but scent is on a different neural network pathway than our cognitive memory. So the parts of me that were damaged from all of the swelling and the infection, the scent olfactory system wasn't. And so it was the first time I felt something familiar. And I could feel like a memory, but I didn't know what that was. And so for the first time at this point, they had figured out if they put me in really dark glasses with the little side things and a baseball cap, that I could see more shadows. And so therefore I could actually like reach for something and get in the proximity of it. And so I picked up the very first time I ever wanted to know what was my environment. We're now 9 months post-coma, and this is the first time I wanted to engage ever that I could remember consciously as this version of me. And when they wheeled me around the corner to this center stall barn, and they're dark. I don't know if you've ever been in a barn before, but they're not super bright, like there's a little bit dim, which was perfect because the brightness hurt my eyes. And this way it wasn't happening. And down 4 stalls on the left, was what looked like a huge, sparkly, energetic highlighter to me. Turns out that I was seeing with my energy eyes, and we'll talk about that if you want to. But
Yes.
he in real life, he's a dark bay thoroughbred. To me, he was sparkly. He had so much light. He was just this golden color that was just beautiful, and it drew me to him. I, for the first time, picked up my hands, did what they had been trying to make me do for months, which was wheel that. The wheelchair slammed into the door and made, I'm sure, all kinds of sound. Schedule was the horse's name. Didn't care. He put his head up and over top of me and he pulled me in. It was the first reach that I had. I reached up, put my hands as far as I could, pulled myself into him, and I was home. That is the first time I felt me. And I can't, no matter how many times I can feel Schedule. I can feel him hugging me and giving me that place to say, you're okay. And I said for the first time words that they had been trying to make me say, and I said his name, Sketchy. Now, I shouldn't have known his name. I shouldn't have known anything about that. And everything that I couldn't remember, I remembered that being that happened to be in a horse's body and his name of Schedule. That was the first time I was willing to come back in because of the connection that I had to him and to what that is. Luckily, my parents didn't get too offended by that I remembered the horse and not them. And they were willing to say, hey, there's something here. We've never seen her do any of this before. So they talked my barn into, and this is where I will do a huge pause. Do not do this in any way, shape, form, or fashion. This is not okay. They took a saddle, a good old Western saddle, out of the quarter. They threw it up on Schedule, and then they wheeled me over to like one of the jumps, and they stood me from, like, they picked me up from the jump and put me on the horse, and they tied me to him. Do not, like, for real, do not ever tie a person to a horse. However, it happened to be the right move for me at the time because there was no other option. And Schedule and I started to move together and to walk together. But more than anything, the humans were in my way. They were really annoying. They would stop him and until I would sign walk, or I would try to make a guttural sound of walk, and they would all this other stuff. And it was very annoying. So I actually had to start looking at humans, and I was just like, just get out of the way. It's just Schedule enough. But he knew when I would go off balance, he would stop when I would come back. And I wanted more and more to become present in this world because he was in it. And so it started to have the time where I was present at the barn, and then I would go away, and then I would come back and I would go away, and I would come back and go away. And eventually I was able to start to be more and more present in the human world. So eventually, from riding him 3 days a week, technically, his rhythmic movement of the gait of the horse helped my nervous system shine a flashlight on the damaged parts. And voila, here I am, walking, moving. And it took about a year of working with him that way. But really what he did was create a bridge where nobody else could. There was nothing else to bridge me back to this world. But he was that bridge. And that is why I think the flashlight worked, not because it moved my body. It was the connection. And I believe we heal in connection. That's what he was offering me. And it didn't have the pressure that the human world had on me. Everybody wanted me to do something. He was just willing to meet me exactly where I was. And in that type of attuned connection, that's where the healing started to happen.
Yeah, I got a little teary-eyed when you were talking about how Schedule responded to you with just putting his head over the stall and pulling you in. It's almost like it's a hug, as if to say that I'm here with you. We're going to do this together. You said something about seeing energy, and I think let's talk more about that. It sounds like what you saw was not the physical outline of the horse. You saw deep, almost into his soul, almost. You saw the energy, the internal light that I think all of us, animal or human, are made of. I mean, we're basically light energy. And you saw right through that. It seems like you saw right through that. Am I correct?
Yeah. Yeah, you are correct. And that's the sight that came back first was I call it the energy eyes. So when I looked at somebody, I thought I was seeing you, but what I was seeing is your light, is your soul, is the way that is. And then as I started to progress with my eyesight, it was I could see the different aspects of you. Humans stayed shadows for me for very long because they were dense. Like the we're complicated little beings. We're all over the place except for here. And so there's a lot that we bring into it. Animals and plant beings, like this beautiful plant being over here, they're very simple. They're like, here's who I am. Sometimes if trauma is in their background, there might be some blurred edges and some other versions, but then they usually come in like almost like this, take over for a little bit, and then they go back. Humans don't do that. We stay these weird like this. I don't know how else to describe it. It's hard to track us energetically because we have so much in between us that we very rarely get to see ourselves. My intuitive senses became my main senses because my physical senses were so disrupted. So eventually, I thought I was talking and I thought I was listening and I thought I was dialoguing with everything around me. Turns out I wasn't. What I was talking to and dialoguing with was all on a different frequency, more of that, what most people would call telepathic. And so all the things that I thought were there weren't really there. Some of the stuff was, some of it wasn't. So when my physical senses started to come back online, and it took about 2 years, it was a real problem for me because I didn't know. I didn't know that I didn't work the same way because I didn't have any of that programming telling me what a human should and shouldn't do. I didn't judge schedule as something less than me because I never knew that I should judge him less than me. So as far as I was concerned, he was the evolved being. He was the being that was able to be attuned and available. Humans were way in the background compared to him. Humans were a real problem for me. The natural world was something that I understood so much better. And it was a whole situation in there.
Yeah. And the thing is, you said that schedule is able to meet you where you're at. That's a skill that coaches and clinicians need to develop. It. So we need to meet the client where they're willing to let us meet them. And
Mhm.
he met you where you were at. He knew you were struggling, and he said, "Okay." He's going to adjust his beat to your rhythm,
Mhm.
and he took care of you. He instinctively knew when he was going too fast, or he knew when you were kind of a little bit nervous. He would adjust.
Mhm.
I mean, you don't get that kind of synergy or synchronicity between human to human to human.
Yeah,
And
and he required repair. So, like, if I got mad and, like, got frustrated in my body and did, like, like, moment or, like, tugged on the reins or, like, kicked too hard, he'd stop on a dime, Dave, like, "Hmm?" And he'd be like he'd just wait. And sometimes he would just breathe, and I would reorganize myself, and I didn't have the words to say what happened, but once I got back in and he would go again. Sometimes, though, I had to make awareness, especially as we started to develop further on and I got rid of those pesky humans and I started to be able to hold myself up. He needed me to see that, I just got angry at him because I was frustrated with myself. And I would need to apologize. I would need to be like, oh, sorry, that's my bad. I missed that one, and then he'd be like, okay. And off he would go. So he taught me healthy repair. He didn't just let me get away with anything just because I had a trauma response, but he also didn't buck me off and say, screw you, lady. He waited and he let me find my way to that place of awareness, understanding, and correction. And so you think about all the things that as therapists and healing professionals and parents and, that level of attunement, he was my first teacher in how to be a sacred witness. And I always say now my whole job is to show up for somebody like Schedule showed up for me.
well, yeah, and obviously he was a great teacher.
He was a master.
Yes, yes. The thing was, I saw a meme on Facebook, Michelle. It said something like, sometimes something about the fact that what we learn about humanity doesn't necessarily come from our fellow humans. And I think our animals can teach us more about humanity than humans can.
Well,
in
that
some
brings me,
in some ways, in
yeah.
many ways.
Well, now that's where I want to highlight another thing that schedule taught me. And it was a really harsh lesson. I was struggling. This is probably about 2 years after that time frame. So I was in high school at this point, and I was really struggling with, I just became this weird chameleon thing in high school where, I still didn't know who I was or anything else like that. I had no memory. And so this human world, I just went into freeze, functional freeze, people pleasing all over the place. I learned that fighting didn't work, and I wanted to start to push back on it. There were things about the human world that I was just like, I don't get this. Like, why would people do this to each other? Why do they talk to each other? I can hear their soul and it's saying, stop, don't do that. I can hear their heart saying, please don't say that. And yet they would do it, and they would hurt people and they would hurt themselves. And I'm like, why is this happening? And at the barn, I was noticing the same thing. So now I was riding with other people, right? Like my age, I had caught up. I had gone from that place of like, basically never hardly being able to hold on to the horse. And I had caught back up to where I was. And I was watching people abuse horses, and I was watching horses check out, and I would watch them like come back in and ask the same question that Schedule would ask me when he would stop. And then they would kick him and kick him, and then they would go. And I asked Schedule one time sitting in the field, like, what's happening here? And the response I got back is I was shown all these places where the horses were trying to ask the human to meet them. And the human just blew past them over and over. And he let me know that to survive in the human world, I'd have to make a choice. I'd either choose to try to make them as happy as I could, do the best I can, keep my head down, and just people please, basically. Or I would have to fight back. And if I chose to fight, one or two things were going to happen. Either we were going to escalate and escalate and escalate, and either I would win, but I would lose the connection, or I'd let them win and I would lose myself in it. And so he's like, you'd have to pick which one you want to do. And he's like, that's the human world. And I was like, but we don't do that. And he's like, you're not human. It was a bit of a complex for me. I was like, oh my God, am I human? Am I not? But eventually I figured out, yes, I am. But what I was is I wasn't a conditioned human. I was a raw, true human, which is where I believe we all have that humanity to treat each other with kindness and curiosity and wanting to do repair work. The conditioned versions of us, that's the part that gets lost in the scarcity, the control, the comparison, and moving from fear instead of moving from love.
I mean, I think all of the contracts that we engage in the human experience, the conflicts, all of that are layers that are used to kind of prevent each other from looking at the true essence of ourselves. But, eventually you got to kind of just look beyond that to see, see the essence of a human being. If you look at the essence of any human being, even the most repulsive of human beings, they're still light energy. They're still made of love and light. And what they're doing in the human existence is basically for the evolution of their souls, and is not readily understood by those who are witnessing that firsthand, or are, I don't want to say victims, but who are affected by that individual's actions.
Collateral damage is what I started to call it. It's like when we're in that hurt part of us, any of us, and me included, I call like the years from when I woke up at 13 to like 23, when I had my second awakening experience, which was just a hard reset. But that I call it the abuse years, because I abused myself, I abused others, I let myself be abused by, like it was just a hot mess of 10 years of abuse that happened in that unconscious conditioned version of myself, and in that survival, flight, fight, or freeze. I just wanted to belong. I just wanted to not be the girl that disappeared and sat in a wheelchair. I wanted the pain of not being able to share people, because when I tried to tell people what I could see or hear, it was either misused or fear-based, and ridicule and disbelief. And when I would prove to people by like, look, here's what I'm hearing, here's what I'm seeing, and it was stuff that I shouldn't know or couldn't know, then that also went really not great. So I learned to just be quiet and separate and hide and to do that, that's so much pain. And at 23, I was finally like, this is too much. I can't do this earth school. This is so much pain. I'm so disorganized. I still had so much, even though my body had healed to the point where I was walking, running, and my eyesight had come back pretty much, but I still had horrible migraines and my hearing had started to come back in, and I was getting speech therapy. And you can still hear it if you know
Mhm.
what you're listening for. You will hear in my voice that there's still kind of nasally and guttural, and the way I learned to speak isn't quite like traditional, because the hearing was still only at about 60% and a little bit garbled and underwater. But I was just done. I was like, this place is nothing but pain. We just keep hurting each other. I keep hurting myself. I don't want to keep doing that. And, I was like, this is time to blow this popsicle stand. Schedule had died. And when he died, my tether, my anchor, I hadn't formed it to me because there was still no sense of me. I had formed it to him. So once he wasn't there, I just absolutely lost all tether there for a little bit. And by all accounts, I should be dead. But that's where another beautiful being that was in my life, Baron, my German Shepherd, he licked into my mouth after I had passed out from taking a handful of pills. And I threw up and I woke up. And again, he showed me the vision of that light, that same light I had seen in schedule. He showed it to me. And he was like, why don't you love her the way I do? And I was just like, I know they don't lie. So I know that what he showed me was real. But as I was washing the pills out of my hair and wiping down that mirror, I was just like, I don't know her. And I was looking at the mirror, trying to see with my energy eyes. And all I saw back was this hollow, dead eyes looking back at me. And I then saw Baron's vision again in my mind's eye, and I was like, I've got to go find her because she exists. And I'm here and I'm awake. And so let me go find her. And that's how I dove into the healing journey and the healing arts and all in. Like if there was a classroom on trauma work and healing and somatic work and shamanic work and this, that, and the other, I was in it. I wanted to know, how do we find our way back when we've
Mm.
been so separated by life?
Yeah, and the techniques, the schools of thought that you mentioned are all helpful in that area and probably, I think, can be more enlightening than traditional evidence-based therapies or Western medicine. And in combination with evidence-based or Western medicine can be dynamite.
I think that
And
combo, it's the
yeah,
combo.
I tell my students at Utica University, it used to be science on one side, spirituality or holistic practices on the other side. Now they're coming together in an integrated fashion, and we're seeing how the two of them together can synergistically help individuals achieve better well-being, both psychologically and physically and emotionally. So that leads me into my next question is your nonprofit Unbridled Change. And I know that's where a lot of your healing arts and a lot of the things that you do come into play. So let's talk about your nonprofit. What's the mission? Who typically requests your services and what are the services that you provide?
Yeah, so I started Unbridled Change back in 2008. And at that point, our main service was the equine partner psychotherapy, is what I call it, and coaching. So those were the two main arms of the program. And that's because at that point, that's what I was willing to let people see. Like there was science in front of it. So I had a good old science shield. We had those best practices. So, we were working under like AFT model, acceptance and commitment therapy, and DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, and so we had these different best practices. We were bringing in the emotional, mental, spiritual piece by bringing in things like EMDR and tapping, emotional freedom technique with Dawson Church, like different ways that were best practices again that had the science in front of them, and biofield tuning and stuff like that, working with breath work and stuff that HeartMath did. Everything that I brought in of how we worked with the horses had that science shield in front of it to begin with. But what I found quickly as I was teaching and helping grow the field of equine partner psychotherapy and being in the cutting edges of those organizations that were doing that, is that when I would go to different barns and I would teach different people, they could not replicate what was happening in Unbridled Change. So the experiences that I was having with the clients that I was working with and the writers that I was working with, and whether that was in the mental health space or the physical space through therapeutic writing or hippotherapy, as it wasn't matching. And what I quickly started to recognize is that the horses were not free to be a partner. They were not free to have a voice as a valued member. And so therefore, the type of connection that was being offered, they might as well have been a bale of hay or a wheelbarrow or a exercise ball, a Pilates ball. That's what they were. They were the shadows or the ghosts that schedule had shown me all those years ago. That's what was walking around that arena. And so you had traumatized horses mixing with traumatized people, and you were getting a feel-good effect, photo ops and stuff like that. But that deeper level, cellular level, and that reattunement and rewiring spontaneously and in that beautiful way that can happen in that therapeutic relationship. Sometimes it was happening despite what was happening to the horses because of the humans that were involved. And sometimes the humans would get out of the way just enough that the kid and the horse would do their little side thing despite the team, and I started to recognize, it was about 2016. I was like, I can go teach everybody every technique known to how to follow this, but if I don't help them free their heart, if I don't help them recognize themselves the way Schedule and Baron helped me find myself, it wouldn't matter. And so that's when the horses came to me and they said, it's time for you to stop being behind us. You need to stop trying to push equine partner psychotherapy, and you need to help them become their own witness. You need to help them cultivate a healing presence for themselves and for others. That's where we need you. That's where humanity needs to be. And then if they want to learn how to work with us, great, bring them back to us, but don't ask us to do that heavy lifting right off the bat. Help them get to their heart, help them be in that space, and then come back. So that's where in 2016, 8 years in, we did kind of this big swap. And yes, I still have the equine component. I'll always have that. But a lot of the time is now over here helping people, whether they're local or not. That's the other thing that it was able to do, build that, what I call a bridge of connection back to their true self, back to who they really are.
Yeah, give them the tools to do the inner work, the internal work, find out their true selves, and then they can bond in a very, very, I don't want to say spiritual, but a very pure, a very, heart-shaped and heart-mannered essence with the animals, with the horses and the other animals that you have in that barn. It makes sense. We have to provide, before they can appreciate and be able to see that true energy connection that we do share with animals. And animals are very intuitive anyway. They sense when their humans are having a bad day, and they know instinctively what to do. And the veil between this world and the other, and the afterlife with animals, and I've learned, is very minimal. I mean, because of their alpha brainwave activity, they're very intuitive. They can see multidimensionally, and they can sense that. They can be our bridge to understanding a multidimensional universe.
I think that's what ultimately the horses were up to in a very sly way, because I just thought I was bringing people back to equine psychotherapy, teaching that. And then, well, yes, I do that, and I do teach people who want to learn that. What they were really asking me to do is help build this bridge for where you were just talking about, that humanity as a collective, we need to start honoring life in all forms and recognizing it. And by doing that, that's our only way forward. Ultimately, I figured out what the horses were up to when they were asking me, is they were asking me to start to be an ambassador and a guide for really how do we all shed this conditioning that needs to be shed. We cannot keep treating each other and working with each other and seeing each other this way. We need to start to see, to feel, to hear. And when that part of us is awake, we cannot allow the journey to continue the way it is journeyed. But we can do it in a way that might seem, some people might have a really out there point of view, but our everyday life, just imagine the ripples for a second of if you can walk out your door and you can see the light and the soul in the grass and the trees. You can see it in every type of being you come across. You see that breath, that anything is breathing as sacred. How would that change that footprint, the interaction, the empathy? I mean, the ripples are endless, you know?
Yeah, and we would feel connected to truly something greater than ourselves. And it isn't just a human connection, it's a connection with all forms of life, whether it's animals, whether it's plant, whether it's vegetation, whether it's rocks. Everything has a spirit. Everything has something to teach us if we are open to being taught by multiple forms of life. And you take a look at the indigenous cultures, and particularly the Native American cultures, they have a high reverence. They work cooperatively with nature, collaboratively with nature. Their animals represent rich teachings that guide them in their everyday lives. Our animals inhabited this earth probably long before we did. So they have every right to be here. I think I read somewhere that we share 70% of our DNA with cats. And, so I mean, basically we're all one
And
anyway.
for like it's like, let's go out of even what we consider as sentience, like
Yeah.
with fruit, with like different
Yeah.
types of fruit. What if we gave sentience to all different types of beings? The oracle deck that I just did, and it's a sacred witness, is what we're talking about. It's all animals and plant medicine
Mhm.
because it's representing 56 core themes that we as humans interact with on our healing journey. However, we humans don't always have the answer of how to best help connect and serve ourselves through. So bringing in just the imagery of animal and plants mixing with a human question, is trying to lovingly challenge our idea of what this community can offer us. This beautiful snake plant over here. Yeah, helps clean my air in my house, but then also what else is this snake plant doing? You know?
And also including plants, animals, trees, vegetation, whatever, that expands our understanding of community.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing, I know you've written, your book, The Horse Cure, and
Yeah.
that's the first book that I resonated with when I was exploring your website. But I also know you've published something recently. You can feel free to show it for the YouTube viewers. It's Trauma Informed Enlightenment. So tell us about that book. Tell us what inspired the book, and tell us what you want readers to take away from it, Michelle.
Yeah, let me just hold it for a second just to ground myself. I do want to give a shout out to The Horse Cure. I love that book because it was a kind of a swan song. I had cancer. We've talked about that a little bit in the past, and it was at stage 4 and it was not looking good. And I really didn't want the way that I had learned to partner and interact and the wisdom that horses gave me. I mean, they were not only my first anchor in this world, they were my healer, they were my teacher, they were my friends, they were my everything. And so I wanted that to just share the stories of what that could look like. And so that's what The Horse Cure is. It's stories of what it can look like when a horse meets us in that raw place, that same place that Schedule did. And so it's just beautiful. I got permission from clients that are in there, change the course of the different things to make them all good. But we follow 2 people. One's a child and one's an adult that I worked with. And you follow them kind of through their treatment and then a couple of their caveats of some other stories. So it's one of those books that I just want everybody to read because it opens us up to our own healing journey through the power of story, but it also lets us start to break down some of those barriers of what we think beings can and can't do. So I love The Horse Cure. But what it didn't do is I didn't try to share how I do anything. I didn't try to share why or what the process was or how I knew to bring that activity into that client session or ask the client that question. I didn't share any of that because I was really just trying to get the essence down and I thought I was going to die. So I didn't need to critique anymore, like anything else like that. I didn't die. So, here I am. And people kept asking, Michelle, how do I do this for me? Like they had you holding that space. You somehow knew how to ask that question. How did you do that? Well, I hadn't outed myself. And if you read that book, you can tell that I'm an empath. But if you don't know what you're looking for, you won't. I don't say it, because at that point I hadn't come out of the energetic closet to people who didn't know me. Like I had that science shield
Hmm.
base. This book takes down the science shield and says, hey, guess what? We all have this capacity. Let me help you learn how to witness yourself. Let me help you learn how to connect to your inner wisdom, to your soul, spirit, whatever you want to call that aspect of you. Let me help you connect to your wounded parts that are talking to you, that are driving your bus, and you don't even know it until you're like, oh, who knew? I had a 5-year-old driving my bus right now. Like, how do we talk to that? How do we work with that? So that you can recreate that, so that you can bring the exercises and the concepts that are in here into, I love working as an adjunct, so bring your different providers. So you can bring this to the providers that you're working with and say, hey, I was doing this visualization exercise on the inner bridge of connection, and I realized I really don't trust myself. So the book can stand alone to help walk you through each one. And then it's a 3-part thing with a guidebook and it's a deck. So it has a whole nother like workbook and guidebook. I love this set. It's so amazing. But again, it'll help walk you through. So when the schematic cards come forwards, this is what it is.
Oh, cool.
And it's not a little itty bitty thing. It's meant to be used as a companion. And working with that, that's a card that just wanted to come out. The death of the false self, like we're all shedding our skins, but honoring the skin that we had. But we got to be willing to look at it, and we have to honor it, understand it, and then we can move into the new.
Yep.
So that was the answer to the question I kept getting asked from the horse cures. Like, how do I do this? What if I'm not drawn to horses, Michelle? What if I like drumming? Okay, cool. Bring it to drumming. What if I like artwork? Bring it to artwork. What if I like expressive writing? Bring it there. What if I suck at visualization but I like to walk, okay, let's bring this into a walking meditation, really allowing ourselves to trust the wisdom that we each have within us, that it's a shamanic teaching, the wisdom, the medicine is within the wound. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, and basically, it's just like you offer different tools that individuals can utilize to manage and transcend their own trauma. And there's so many different practices we can choose from that are going to create awareness. I mean, you could talk about ecotherapy, you could talk about music therapy, art therapy, visualization, guided imagery, meditation, yoga, Reiki, whatever.
Yeah.
There's just a bunch of them, and it's like you can choose what you feel drawn to choose. That's a way that we could develop our intuition too. It's like, what are we drawn to?
Mhm.
If you were doing a oracle card spread and you told an individual just whatever card resonates with you, whatever card you feel drawn to energetically, you pick that card. Don't just let your intuition guide it.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, and when I've done that, it's with students is kind of an exercise to trust their own intuition. 9 times out of 10, Michelle, the card that they've picked, whether it was an animal card or an oracle card, contained some type of a teaching or wisdom that either was related to a current challenge that they were going through, or perhaps a future decision that they had to make. So we all have that. We all have the ability to be empaths. We all have the ability to have intuition. We just have to be open to it and just trust that it's there.
I think that's such like that invitation to start to explore and play, and curiosity is one of the cards in the deck. Is I'm also certified through Carolyn Mason archetypal consultant.
Yep.
And so the archetypal work is such a thing. And, as you were talking, that reminded me of when you said, you have them draw those cards. It's like, that's the same thing for my clients. Is we draw a card at the beginning of every month, and that archetypal card or oracle card, whatever deck's, talking to them, like, how is that asking you to see through that lens of that pattern and what it is? And then as you start to move through that month, you start to be able to realize, like, oh, I can feel that, I can see that, and what does that look like? And you start to recognize that you're not as a finite, closed system as we think we are. That's what trauma does to us. It makes us feel just like how I felt, completely isolated, completely alone, completely under attack, boxed into a corner, just having to beg, borrow, and steal, do whatever I needed to do to survive. When we start to recognize we're not in that corner, that we have more freedom. We have more ability to choose, to see, to change even the way we see something, the way we feel something. If it's a health diagnosis, the way we're going to meet that. If it's a life experience, the way that we can meet it. We start to really recognize, hey, we have more power here than we thought. And to me, that's why I call it trauma-informed enlightenment, because that's enlightenment. Realizing that we're not stuck in this closed system, just trying to endure and survive and time out the time between the dash. Oh, you can come back from feeling completely. I mean, I hated this thing called Michelle. I mean, hated is too nice of a word, Dave, for what I felt towards myself, towards my life, towards this girl. I felt like I had robbed somebody. I had robbed their family of this child that they had put on a pedestal. I had stolen somebody's life. And we can come back from that.
Mhm.
And we can
Yeah.
come back in a way that loves us.
No, absolutely. It's just, we can be empowered to embrace love as opposed to fear, love as opposed to anger, love as opposed to hate or self-loathing. We can do that. We are as I've read somewhere, we're the conductor, we're the writer, and we're the orchestrator of our own reality. It's just how do we choose to pen the lyrics? And, we can do that. We can be empowered to transcend whatever has been thrown at us. If we have support, if we have, beautiful guides like Schedule and Baron that help show us the way, it just proves that we are all capable of being unconditionally loved. And we were born with love anyway, so we shouldn't have to earn that. But a lot of times with the human condition, things that happen to us, the conditions that have been placed on us, the experiences that have led to trauma, those experiences question whether or not we do deserve to be loved. And we are. But at the essence, we are loving human beings, but it's getting through all the layers to get to that essence. And I think what you do when you're through your own experiences, what you do to help others, I think helps us get to the true essence of self.
The idea, that's the mission that really woke up when Schedule gave me that hug. So he taught me healing comes in connection.
Yep.
Unconditional love and connection. And then when Baron saved me again and was like, hey, what's happening here? And again, he brought me into that place of like, can we find our way back from absolute terror and pain and yes. And it does take guides who have gone there. Hopefully this is a trustworthy guide that can meet people in that space if they don't have the practitioners, a way to help to bridge that gap and to work with it as well. But ultimately to help remind us that we do have the power to move from love. Life does separate us. That's not an illusion. That's real. Collateral damage and what we do to each other when we're lost in that is absolutely not okay. The medicine is in the wound, meaning we have that medicine within us. And we don't have to wait for somebody else to come unlock that. And that was the power. That was the one. When I went into that little workshop and came out, I don't really remember everything else from that workshop, but that piece, it was like you gave me gold. And all of a sudden I was like, I can do the alchemy led to gold thing because I'm no longer waiting for somebody to unlock my feeling. We can do that.
Absolutely.
And that's what I love to share this message. And that's what I felt when I listened to your podcast with the journeys and the teaching is like, that's it. That wisdom is within us.
And it's just up to us to cultivate that and to celebrate that and have enough confidence in our own wisdom to be able to step into our own power. So, Michelle, you have left us with so much good stuff today. And it's just been a pleasure getting to know you, getting to know your journey. So with that, my last question for you is going to give you an opportunity to promote yourself a little bit. So tell us how individuals can contact you, contract for your services, purchase your books, just find out more about what's going on in your life. What's the best way for them to do that?
Probably the website I try really hard to keep it up to date, and it has links to everything that I'm up to. And so that's unbridledchange.org because it is a nonprofit, so ORG. And at that website, you'll find links to the shop so you can get the books, including The Horse Cure is on there. But you can also get these all on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, pretty much any book provider out there has them. Social media, YouTube. I've got a podcast, Soulful Practices, where I just pick a card or a quote or it's teaching, do a little short teaching on it, and then guide people through a practice with it that they can then take throughout their week to help kind of cultivate and shift that perspective. And that they're working with is a great introductory. Tons of free resources that are on my website, from free mini courses and trainings. The best way to work with me now is through the small group offerings that I have and my larger group offerings. And so I do live meditation and mindfulness and movement classes and other stuff like that. I do have a wait list for private one-on-ones, but the group offerings that I am rolling out continuously all the time, I have ones, depending on when you're listening to this, you can find my workshop schedule through there. And then you can get on the wait list for the privates, but it is a little obnoxious. So I'm not going to lie about that, which is why the books are a great way to get into that and to begin to work with that. So I just want people to be able to click that button, get that help when they need it, and not sit somewhere for 6 months waiting to get into me. So I try to have lots of support there, even if you can't sit down with me.
Well, in your books, basically, it'll be like your voice going inside their heads anyway, because those books are an essence of your own journey, an essence of what you've learned to help you get to the essence of self, and that's certainly going to come out in your books, and your voice will be there. So it's going to be like having you in the room with us.
Yeah, and I am working on the audiobook, so depending when this comes out, it might be done. I'm working on it.
Well, it sounds like you got enough irons in the fire to keep you busy for quite a while, Michelle. But with that, thank you so much for just a wonderful conversation today. It was great getting to know you. I hope we can do this again in the future.
It was a lot of fun, and thank you for your contributions. Again, it's such a great opportunity and healing modality that you offer so many through your journey. And so thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And with that, that's a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.